Hi, Charles SirBookSage here, and welcome to my live stream. There are many things Amazon needs to correct for a more successful season 2 of Rings of Power, but today I'm going to go over 3 particular ones that I feel are probably the most egregious things that they need to correct to have a more successful season 2. And of course, because I'm going live, I just clicked some weird keyboard combination on my keyboard, and now I have this weird magnifying thing going on my screen. So that's going to be make reading my notes very fun. Anyway, let's get to it. The very first thing that Amazon needs to do for a better season 2 is they need to stop having things happen in the show just because they want them to. Season 1 was littered with events that happened simply because that's just what the showrunners wanted. And very little was written in a way where those events or choices by the characters were actually earned in story. And that's not how you tell a good story at all, when you just have things happen. I'm going to give you like a couple of particular examples to go over what I'm talking about of things that need to stop in terms of for season 2. The very first one is the most obvious one right up front, and that is Sauron being on a ship out in the middle of the Sundering Sea. Now, there doesn't seem to be any legitimate in-story reason for why Sauron, or any of those people for that matter, would be on a ship out in the middle of the Sundering Sea. They're somewhere west of Numenor, which means they're between Numenor and Valinor, the continent of Aman, where the Blessed Realm Valinor is. There's nothing in between Numenor and Valinor. There's nothing there. So where in the world were these people going? Because they got on a ship in Middle-earth, like somewhere on the shores of Middle-earth. These people boarded this boat and started sailing west. Now, the show, if you noticed, never bothered to give us a reason for why any of those people were there or why Sauron was with them. One of the women on the raft just mentioned that they'd sailed from 2 weeks ago and then it was cut off. And then they get attacked and they're all killed, except, of course, for Sauron being Halbrand. But the only real reason they were there at all is because this is what the showrunners just decided they wanted Galadriel and Sauron to cross paths. And right off the bat in episode 2 of season 1, right off the bat, I realized that, okay, all these rumors that I've been hearing about this show not being well written are starting to look like they're going to be accurate. And that was a glaring one, because you just can't have like people just be there just because you can't be bothered to come up with a better story. And for that matter, why in the world was Halbrand the identity Sauron was going with? What possible in-story purpose did it serve for Sauron to pretend to be Halbrand? Now, it's convenient for the plot later, but up front, Sauron being in Middle-earth somewhere, why in the world would he suddenly put on this guise of Halbrand, a Southlander human? And that only makes sense if he's in the Southlands and he's manipulating people and events as he's preparing to, build Barad-dûr and make his presence known again and all that stuff. That's the only reason why he might decide to be Halbrand. That's it. It makes no sense to become Halbrand and then get on a ship and sail as far away from the Southlands as you could possibly get on that planet. And keep in mind that Arda in the Second Age is still flat. It's a flat disk. It hasn't been reformed into an actual globe by Iluvatar yet. So if you're getting on a ship from the shores of Middle-earth and you sail west, eventually you're going to come to the western edge of the world. There's nowhere to go. Since it's not a globe, you're not going to just come back around to where you started. So there's no reason whatsoever in that story for why those people would be out there in the middle of nowhere. Where are they going? They can't go to Valinor. Humans aren't allowed there. That's the realm only for the gods and for the elves. So, no reason whatsoever. That's the kind of stuff that has to stop for season 2. Write your plot in a way that makes sense, right? Have characters make choices that make sense. Stop having them do things just because that's the plot and that's what they have to do. And yes, technically, every single thing that happens in a story happens because the writer wants it to happen. But good storytellers weave those in seamlessly so they're earned in story. And very little of season 1 was earned. Another example is also in Numenor. Tolkien had built in an obvious reason for why the Númenórean throne would raise a fleet, sail to Middle-earth, and go to war against the orcs. Because by Muriel's day, the Númenóreans are supposed to have a strong, well-established presence on the western shores of Middle-earth. There should be Númenórean communities all up and down the southwestern shores of that part of the world, because they first come to Middle-earth maybe around the year 1000 or 1200, and then by a few centuries later, they start like basically setting up colonies, and they start colonizing parts of southwestern Middle-earth, going down even into Harad. So by Muriel's day, there's a strong presence there. But in the show, for some bizarre reason, they decided, nope, we're taking the Númenóreans have no presence in Middle-earth at all on the show for some bizarre reason. Now, we know they used to, because the Tir Harad survivors are planning to go to a abandoned Númenórean colony that's been sitting abandoned for who knows how long, but there's no actual presence. So they took away what would make sense for Muriel to raise a fleet and go, because she would be honor bound and duty bound as the Queen Regent to go protect her people that are there. So the show instead came up with this whole convoluted, the Palantir having the vision of Númenor being destroyed, and it's attached to an elf showing up on their shores, and they turned it into this prophetic prophecy thing that motivates her to go all of a sudden. Like, totally unnecessary and really clunkily written. If you're going to go down that road and you want to do this and have like prophetic things be driving Muriel's actions, hey, you need to just, again, write it in a much better, much smarter way. They took aspects of a character that they've eliminated from the Númenórean story and given some of those to Muriel. And it really didn't work that well, because it doesn't really make sense that sorry, dry throat. I should have hydrated much more before I was going to go live. Eventually, as I do more live streams, I'll actually get this down to a science. So, because very little of what happened in Númenor made any sense whatsoever, the way it was written, because they changed so much of the dynamic of Númenor. And this is part of the problem with the compressed timeline. You have a whole group of Númenorians that aren't supposed to exist for another like couple of thousand years, but they're here in Númenor now, while the rest of Middle-earth is around the year 1000. So, for example, like Muriel's born in the year like 31, like 17 or something like that. And the rings are forged in the year 1590 is when the 3 rings are forged. And Sauron goes to Mordor in the year 1000. So we have, like I said, I mentioned that in one of my last videos, events spread out over thousands of years happening at the same time. And to have the last group of Númenóreans here in the show, but not have Númenor have a well-established presence colony-wise on Middle-earth makes absolutely no sense. There's so much of Númenor's story that should have already been in place that they're now going to have to try to squeeze in into the rest of this series. And I don't really know how they're going to do that, especially not the way they've been writing it. And the second thing that needs to be fixed for season 2 is they need to stop removing important characters from the story. The most egregious absence, of course, is Celeborn, Galadriel's husband. And they just didn't have him in the show. He went off to war and didn't come back. So they could waste the entirety of season 1 on this absolutely atrocious Galadriel Halbrand arguing like a married couple all season for no real reason at all. Because Galadriel has no legitimate reason why she's so completely invested in Halbrand instantaneously. And it's not even like it's Sauron like using subtle magical manipulation on her. She just does. And he just like treats her like they've been married forever. Because it also makes not one lick of sense for why Sauron would save Galadriel from drowning in the Sundering Sea. Because if he's planning any kind of rule, Galadriel is going to be one of his like top 3 obstacles. So he would just let her drown. So the fact that they have him save her also is, again, happens just because the show wants it to happen. But character-wise, in story, in character, Sauron would laugh as he watches Galadriel drown to death. But we need Celeborn, we need Círdan, we need Celebrian, Celeborn and Galadriel's daughter, and we need the Gwaithal Myrdain, I think it's called, the group of elven smiths that are with Celebrimbor, because in Eregion, it's not just Celebrimbor forging; he's the main guy, but he has a whole group, like an inner circle, who are called the Gwathi Myrdan. And they're like the top craftsmen who have all come to Eregion to learn with Celebrimbor. They're the ones that Sauron, when he shows up as Anatar, begins to manipulate and corrupt, or he corrupts to a degree the Gwathi Myrdan, though he doesn't corrupt Celebrimbor. But Celebrimbor is just so obsessed with trying to match his grandfather Feanor's feats that he gets swept up in the momentum of like creating all these like higher magic celestial like artisans and crafts and all sorts of things, which then lead to the forging of the rings. But the show just doesn't even have any of this whole group of people there. This whole team of elves is, again, pretty important. It's a whole group that Sauron is manipulating. It's not just one person. So they've changed so much of who's supposed to be in Numenor. They've changed so much of who's supposed to be in Eregion by removing all of these important critical pieces. We also need Círdan. Now, I do believe we are getting Círdan for season 2. I believe they did announce that. So that's good, at least. They're going to start to bring in people who should have been there from day one. Now, for those who may not be aware, Círdan is one of the oldest elves. He's one of the original group of elves that first woke up under starlight at the very, very early days of the world. And so he's someone that High King Gil-galad would look to for advice because of Círdan's wisdom. And Círdan's also a badass warrior, and he guards the Grey Havens, like one of the main ports that's critical to Lindon in terms of just logistics. So he should have been there from day one. So at least we're going to be getting him finally for season 2. And there's also some other parts of in Middle-earth. There's in Lothlorien, which is where Galadriel and Celeborn later rule in the Third Age. Lothlorien, which is known as Lornand, I think at this point, is ruled by a minor, like elven king. This king Andir. Now, whoops, come on. New glasses. Fujifilm's kind of wigging out with the glasses. It doesn't know how to like latch onto the eye sometimes. But anyway, so Lornand at this point is an elven realm, small realm in the forest, that's comprised of mostly Nandoran elves who never made the journey to Valinor. So they've never seen the gods, they've never beheld the light of the trees. They've stayed in Middle-earth. So, but after the First Age, the War of Wrath and everything in the First Age, the Noldorian elves and the Sylvan elves and a lot of them migrated out of Beleriand into this main part of Middle-earth, and then Beleriand was destroyed. So you have all these parts where these other elves have lived all this time now being basically taken over by the Noldor and Sylvan elves. And there is some like cultural animosity between these groups because some of the Nandoran elves in particular, Nimrodel, who's one of an elf maiden there in Lornand, who is in love with the king's son, Prince Amroth. She is like basically keeps herself away from all the rest of the elves. She doesn't like the Noldor elves because to her, the Noldor elves bring death and destruction, which they do, which is kind of basically Feanor's fault. That oath of Feanor that his sons took hangs over all the Noldor elves like a cloud of doom, and it does bring death and destruction wherever they happen to go. So none of this is in the show yet so far. And Lornand, with its proximity to Mordor, pretty important strategic place in the upcoming like battles that are going to start happening in season 2. So I'm hoping that we are going to get to see Lorinand, which again later becomes known as Lothlorien, because also the King Amdir, the Sylvan or the Sindarin elf who rules there, he plays a really important role in the War of the Last Alliance later. So I'm hoping they bring him in because he plays a pretty critical role in the War of the Last Alliance near the Black Gates. There's a particular battle that happens there, and he's like essential to that particular event. Um, hey, how you doing? Is it Caradwen? I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing that right. How you doing? Good to see you in here. Um, I'm just kind of ranting about things that Amazon needs to fix for season 2. So, but we need to have Andir. We need to have his son, Prince Amroth, because for those of you who are familiar with the Lord of the Rings text, in Return of the King, you have Prince Imrahil. He's the Prince of Dol Amroth, which is part of Gondor, and Dol Amroth is named after this Prince Amroth here from this Lorinand community. He's the son of King Andor and eventually becomes king in his own right later on in the Third Age. So I'm hoping these people come into the story because, again, you can't tell the battles of the Second Age without giving us the people who are supposed to be in Lorinand, giving us the people who are supposed to be in Eregion. Eventually, we'll see Rivendell in Imladris established by Elrond later in the Second Age. So that's coming. But these are really Tolkien was very specific about the logistics of the map of Middle-earth. These communities are there not just by happenstance. They form and develop and come into more cohesive realms as Sauron becomes more and more prominent to be places to basically slow down his advance of his army. So Lorinand would be like the front lines, followed by then the orcs having to get over the mountains to then Eregion and Imladris and stuff. So it's the main reason why Galadriel and Celeborn end up in Lothlorien later, is because she's like the first shield against the rising darkness coming out of Dol Guldur and then later Mordor. So, I mean, it's a very strategic place that they choose to basically set themselves up later in the Second Age and then rule in the Third Age. So, but so far we've had none of that at all in season 1. They've left out so much of critical building blocks to the overall story because they wanted to just have this entirely, at this point, self-indulgent Harfoot plot. And unless Theo is going to become one of the Ringwraiths, which is what I suspect, unless he's going to become one of the Ringwraiths, I don't really understand what the point of the whole Tir-Harad plot line is, other than just doing it just to do it. It has to have some sort of payoff, to the overall story. And Theo becoming a Ringwraith seems to be what should be the obvious payoff to having that in plot in the story, because we're talking about a lot of season 1 was taken up by things the show created and added into Tolkien's writings, and which took away a lot of the things Tolkien actually wrote. And I know the show is operating off of just to summarize bullet points, but it's bizarre when you're supposed to be fleshing out those bullet points. You're obviously going to add in your own stuff as well, but to remove some of those things doesn't make any sense at all to me. Why would you not keep in the few things that Tolkien is giving you that are important to the outcome of some of the main events of the Second Age? And this show so far in season 1 has left out a lot of people that are really, really matter. Another example is in Numenor. To go back to Numenor for a moment. In Numenor, they eliminated Amandil. Now, Amandil is Elendil's father. He is the lord of the realm of Andunai, which is over in the western part of the isle. That part of the isle that in the show Isildur's hearing magical voices called them. So in Numenor, you have, I've mentioned this before, you have 2 ideological factions. You have the Kingsmen, and you have the faithful. Now, Numenor, for most of its existence, were faithful. Which means they were friends to the elves. They honored the gods in Valinor, all of that. But eventually, Numenor turns away from that, and with the rise of the Kingsman ideology, where they abandon, reject the elves out of jealousy and envy for their immortality, and they turn their back on the gods. And you have in Numenor, besides the throne itself, you have Tar Palantir, who's the elderly, like dying king, almost living in self-exile, who is a faithful, but that's like caused great strife in Numenor itself. So he's kind of isolated himself to try to minimize that to a degree, even though he's still the king. And Pharazôn is the head of the faithful. I mean, Pharazôn is the head of the Kingsmen. Pharazôn is the king's nephew. He's Muriel's first cousin. Pharazôn's father was the king's brother. And Pharazôn's father was a harsh, hard-line kingsman, where he wanted absolutely nothing to do with the gods, nothing to do with the elves. And he was basically raised Pharazôn to be this way. Now, Lord Amendil, Elendil's father, and Pharazôn were best friends, like inseparable best friends growing up. But Amendil's house is more, they're friendly to the elves. They were probably the outside of the royal line itself originally, because that was Elros, Elrond's brother, was the founding king of Numenor. Outside of them, the lords of Andunai were the most like elf friendly. The Palantir that they have in the show, Muriel mentions there's this one and the other 6 are lost. In reality, what Tolkien wrote is the lords of Andunai hold 7 Palantir. They have the 7 stones. They were gifts to that family because of their deep friendship with the elves. So Elendil's father has all 7 stones. The royal family doesn't have them at all. But in the show, Muriel has one, and her father has one. But what Numenor should be is separate from just the throne itself, and Palantir and his daughter Muriel kind of caught in this sort of ideological wedge in society. You have Amendil, who's one of the top advisors to the king, and Pharazôn is the other top advisor. And these, again, men who were like the best of friends growing up, whose like their houses have kind of caused them to the strife between them now. But there's still, that friendship is still, remnants of it are there. Now, Amendil is playing a very dangerous game in Numenor. And he is publicly, he doesn't oppose the Kingsmen at all. He's just one of the king's most trusted advisors, so he has the king's ear. But he privately, Amendil is the leader of the faithful. So he's running basically this covert network, ideological network, where they have to have like meetings in secret and all this stuff, trying to figure out a way forward in Numenor, how to get the Numenorian people back onto the side of the faithful, back to honoring the gods and the friendship with the elves again. So Amendil is playing a very, very dangerous game. And we should have had the Numenorian story, should have been this fascinating, like political machinations, like the things that Game of Thrones and House of the Dragon season 1 were so good at doing. This is what Numenor should be in this show. This sort of watching this sort of battle, this struggle between these two powerful lords with the royal family caught in the middle of it. And Amendil playing this sort of like almost cat and mouse game, or trying to like run this sort of secret society that's trying to help them, but is in danger of being caught and killed at any moment. And the show just completely eliminated all of that. Amendil doesn't seem to exist in the show. And Muriel doesn't even know who Elendil is. If you look at her from when they first get to Numenor, she asks Pharazôn, who is, like, pointing to Elendil, like, who is he? She doesn't even know. When in reality, his father is her father's like one of his closest advisors. So she would know Elendil, and she would know all about his family. So it's just all of these characters are missing, and they play such important roles in what Tolkien actually wrote. So I hope that some of these are going to start showing up in season 2 and then going forward. because you really can't, like, you cannot tell the upcoming wars with Sauron and the elves without Celeborn. He's such a central player in those wars and how they go down. So I really, really hope they start getting back to putting in these characters that they left out. Because if you think about, to make an analogy to the Game of Thrones TV show, the decision to not include Lady Stoneheart had such a ripple effect that just kept growing and growing and growing through the rest of that series. Changing her, like not having her there, completely changes the Brotherhood's whole entire plot. It changes the Brotherhood's plot. It changes Brienne's plot. It changes Jaime's plot. And the show just decided to completely change Sonya's plot all on their own. Besides that, and then they started eliminating a whole bunch of other characters from the books. So the reason Game of Thrones ran out of book material is because the showrunners threw half the book material away. So there was plenty of story there for multiple seasons before they ran out of what was written in the 5 published books. They just discarded so much of it. And it's really troubling to watch Rings of Power do that up front. Season 1, they've discarded so many important characters and places to this overall story. So I'm hoping that they'll correct course in season 2 and start bringing these really important characters in. Now, this ties into the third thing that Amazon needs to fix for a better season 2, and that is stick closer to the established canon. Tolkien was very, very particular about what happens. And yes, he has like 25 different versions of all the events that happen in all of his writings because he was always tweaking and changing and trying different things. But in general, we know these are the major events that happen. These are the characters, these are the battles, these are the characters who survive them, these are the ones who die in them, all this stuff. So they need to stick closer to the actual story in what Tolkien wrote, because I don't understand why you would, like I said, why you would extract the very little bit that you were given by Tolkien to work with. You should be able to flesh these things out into interesting plots. Instead, they're just changing so many things and eliminating so many things. And then either just not bothering to replace them with anything or coming up with really dumb replacements. So, and to give you an example, the single most egregious example of this, of changing canon in a way that really just obliterates canon to a degree, is the forging of the 3 Elven Rings. Now, in the story, the 7 are forged and the 9 are forged, and then Anatar leaves and goes back to Mordor, but like drops his Anatar disguise to begin work on the One Ring to control these rings that the Celebrimbor and the Gwathi were forging. And so Celebrimbor gets it into his mind to forge 3 more rings, and he forges the 3 Elven Rings in secret, alone. No one knows he's doing it with materials that were not used in the forging of the 7 and the 9. So Sauron's hands never touched a single element that went into these 3 Elven Rings in what Tolkien wrote. So these are unsullied, is how Tolkien described them. Now, they're still vulnerable to the One Ring because of the particular celestial magic that Sauron was teaching them that they don't understand. It makes them vulnerable. But as far as the rings themselves go, Sauron never touched a single element or component that went into making these rings. And in the TV show, they just skip the 7, they skip the 9, and they go right to forging the 3 rings. And Halbrand, Sauron is there, has Halbrand in the workshop, and he's touching every single piece that goes up into the making of these rings. Now, if you have a sibling and you were kids, and one of the things siblings do is like, "Ooh, I got cooties and all that stuff." Like Sauron is like, there's a box of donuts on the table, and you and like your little brother, you're like, "Ooh, we're gonna get some donuts," and then your brother's like, putting his hands, "I got my cooties all over the donuts. You can't eat them now. Ha ha ha! They're all mine." This is what they have Halbrand and Sauron doing in the show. He's walking around the studio, and then he's picking up all the individual pieces of the materials that are going to go into these 3 elven rings. So what possible reason would they get it into their brains to have Sauron's hands all over the only ring Sauron has never had anything to do with? I just can't for the life of me understand, because that has to be a deliberate choice on the part of the showrunners to make that massive critical change to this canon of this story. Because these are no longer really the 3 elven rings anymore. They can't be if Sauron's touched every component that went into them. So it just completely changes the rings and everything about them. So they need to cut that crap out. I get the whole you want to modernize it and all that nonsense, but there's no legitimate reason to just change like critically important elements of the story itself. You can modernize it to your heart's content by having a wide variety of cast. But that's a completely separate thing from then changing like critical story pieces, critical world building pieces. Those don't make any sense unless you just hate the professor and you want to destroy his works, and that's the kind of change you do. But I don't want to go down that road in this discussion here. So another thing that they just completely changed as well is just Eregion as a whole. Now, Galadriel and Celeborn are the ones who are the Lord and Lady and Lord of Eregion. They rule in Eregion. It's their realm. Galadriel and Celeborn are the ones who established it. And Galadriel is the one with the close friendship to the dwarves in Khazad-dûm. In the show, they gave that to Elrond instead. But Galadriel is the one who has that relationship with them. Her husband, Celeborn, has a deep animosity and distrust with the dwarves, because a different set of dwarves betrayed the elves in the first age. I think back in Doriath, or I think it was Doriath, that led to the slaughter of a lot of the elves. So even though Dorian's folk in Khazad-dûm weren't those dwarves, he still like has a resentment to the whole dwarven world. So, and with Celeborn not being there, this whole dynamic doesn't even exist. And these are important elements to how the story plays out, and why certain characters decide to make the decisions that they do. Like when Galadriel and their daughter Celebrian decide to pass east to the other side of the mountains, the Misty Mountains. They want to go down into closer to Mordor to kind of be that first shield against Sauron. Galadriel and Celebrian travel through Khazad-dûm. They're welcome there. Celeborn refuses because of his animosity to the dwarves. So he travels over the mountains instead when he eventually goes. So all these kind of things, these are important dynamics to this story and this world and these people and how these different sort of species, if you will, interact with each other. Because there's a lot of history that's already happened in the first age that weighs heavily on a lot of these characters, especially the elves. There's a lot of pain and trauma and tragedy that they're suffering from that really impact how they view this world and its people. And none of that, hardly any of that at all, is present in this show. And yes, Celebrimbor's guildsman, yeah, that's that Gwaith Ymir Dane group. Sauron kind of convinces that group to rebel against the Galadriel and Celeborn's rulership there. And that's one of the reasons also why they leave Eregion as well, is because they realize, okay, we're no longer wanted here. This is no longer our place. It's Celebrimbor's and his people's place now. So yeah, and none of those people, that whole guildsman team, they're not even in the show at all so far. They weren't present at all in season 1. I mean, Celebrimbor had like Fred, his elf assistant, in the back, doing most of the work, by the way, forging those rings. So because the rings seem to be only magical because of the magical mithril that the show has invented, anyone could have forged those rings. His assistant, like I said, Fred, the elf assistant there, could have just forged those rings himself if he had a piece of mithril. Doesn't make any sense. So, I suppose. So yeah, I'm using StreamYard because I can display comments. So I should actually display comments from the live chat. So this is what I was responding to just a minute ago from Jesse. What someone was, yes. But yes, so they're involved, and they basically sort of carry out a mini coup against Galadriel and Celeborn. So kind of disappointing for them to not be present in the show at all. And unless they're gonna have Galadriel continue to be just the dumbest, most insufferable character in this entire show, and have her not tell Celebrimbor and Elrond and Gil-galad that Halbrand is Sauron, I don't understand how Sauron could come back again to Eregion to continue to manipulate these elves. Or, I just don't understand how that's even gonna happen. Are they just abandoning that? I mean, at this point, this in show, Sauron doesn't even know there's gonna be 7 rings and 9 rings. He doesn't even know about them in this show if they do still get forged. And his desire to possess the 7 and the 9, because he doesn't know the 3 initially, are one of the catalysts for Sauron to go to war against elves, is to get those rings. And then once he forges his ring, he discovers from his mind, his betrayal by Celebrimbor forging 3 more rings in secret. So I don't know how they're going to repair all of this stuff, because they did so much of it backwards. You don't start with the 3 rings; those come later. So I really don't know how they're going to fix any of this, or if they're even interested in fixing any of it. They discarded so much of what's actually happening in season 1. I'm trying to figure out how they could even begin. Only by bringing in the characters that they've left out can they begin to bring in a lot of the plot that they left out as well. That's the only way they can try to accomplish it. And that's the other thing too, like I mentioned, they need to stop having critical events happen out of order. Because if you look back at season 1, realistically, only 3 things of import happened. And I don't count the Mount Doom being turned on by a magical sword. I'm ignoring that absolutely idiotic plot device. The only 3 critical things that happened in season 1 at all were the death of the Númenórean king Tar Palantir, the forging of the 3 rings, of elven rings, and Sauron coming to Mordor. And all 3 happened in reverse order that they happened in the story. So they do also stop doing that. If you're going to actually give us things that Tolkien wrote, you need to kind of give them in the order that they happen in the story. There's important reasons, plot-wise, and decision-making for why these characters make some of the choices they make, because of choices other people make. So if you have this choice here becomes a motivating factor for the second person, you can't have this choice made after the second person makes his choice, because they're built on top of each other. And season 1 had so many things out of order that, again, nothing made any sense. Nothing was earned in story, because they couldn't even keep things in the proper order, let alone the few actual things that they gave us that Tolkien actually wrote. So I don't know where they're going to go from here. Are we just going to have Celebrimbor just forge 7 rings and 9 rings more? And why? Because the reason they're forged in the books is not the reason they're forged in the TV show. The TV show invented this idiotic elven tree of immortality that they're trying to save. And that's why Celebrimbor fashions the rings. In the books, Sauron creates the threat of himself and then becomes Anatar and uses the threat of himself to manipulate the elves into forging these powerful magical weapons to use against Sauron, that he's forging to be able to corrupt and control them, than to force them on his side later. So one of my favorite things, to go to Star Wars for a moment, one of my favorite things is Palpatine. Palpatine is very similar to Sauron in terms of how he functions, how he operates. Palpatine is playing both sides. He's manipulating the Republic. He's manipulating the Jedi Order. He's manipulating the Separatists. He's manipulating even his own, like Dooku. He's manipulating everybody, like pushing and pulling and prodding, and just seeing weaknesses and slowly corrupting each separate faction until eventually everything comes to a breaking point. And then that's when he Order 66s and seizes power. And this is basically, I don't know if it was intentional on Lucas's part, but Palpatine's machinations are styled very much after Sauron. the way Tolkien writes him. So Sauron is a master manipulator. Very good at figuring things out and, like you said, tweaking and poking and pulling and prodding. And he creates the threat and then manipulates the elves' answer to the threat to his advantage for him to try to control. So, and there again, none of that is happening in this show because they're doing things out of order. Because they decided to not have Sauron go to Mordor first, which is how season 1 should have opened, and establish a threat that would then lead to the elves needing to come up with these rings. They invented the entire, like I said, stupid tree of immortality that bizarrely, for some strange reason, just happens to exist in Lindon, which then is the reason behind them forging weapons that has nothing to do with the actual threat that they're actually forged as a result of in the books. So there's so much of the actual story that they need to repair to try to have any chance of salvaging a much better series than we got in season 1. Because when you just completely take out why things happen and come up with either don't bother to replace why they happen with a different reason because you just want them to happen and they happen just spontaneously because, or you come up with the absolute dumbest reasons, like this Silmaril infusing Mithril with its magical powers and a magical tree of immortality for the elves. It somehow holds the immortality of every elf that's ever existed. It's like, I don't understand what motivates them to do these kinds of changes. I mean, the guy gave you a good story, and he gave these characters built-in reasons for why things happen the way they happen. Stop changing them. You can flesh them out. You can add in all the characters you want, all the subplots you want. You can do all those things, but there's no need to change the central beats of the story itself, which is they did massively in season 1, unfortunately. So now, that said, with those 3 things that they need to fix, here's how I would open up season 2 of The Rings of Power. I would do this as a cold open season, a cold open scene. And this would be my way, if I was running the show, to announce that you're going to get a much better season 2. Now, like I mentioned, and part 2 of what they need to fix, bringing in the characters that are supposed to be there, like Celeborn, I would open up season 2 with a cold open scene where we open up on an elf in a dungeon in some castle somewhere. He's haggard, he's clearly been held prisoner for a long time, and he kind of wakes up and he hears fighting out in the corridor, and the door bursts open, and in walks, all shining in the light of the gods, in walks Glorfindel. The elf in the dungeon is Celeborn. Celeborn's been held prisoner since the War of the Wrath in the First Age, and Glorfindel's been sent by Manwë, by the gods, to Middle-earth to help because they realize Sauron has reemerged. So Manwë actually does send Glorfindel back. He basically reconstitutes him, brings him out of the halls of the dead, gives him life back, and sends him to Middle-earth to aid the Noldor. So I would have Glorfindel rescuing Celeborn and some other elves who've been held in captivity in secret this whole time. And you have a badass scene. You bring in here's where Celeborn's been. You solve that problem. Here's Glorfindel. Every single one of us book readers have been waiting to see live action Glorfindel since we were denied Glorfindel in Fellowship of the Ring in the first movie from Peter Jackson. I understand again why Peter Jackson used Arwen in that scene to get Frodo to Rivendell after Weathertop. Makes sense thematically for the movie, but me and a whole bunch of people are still salty that 20 years later we never got Glorfindel, and he's in this story. He's there in Middle-earth in the Second Age. So include him, have him rescue Celeborn. You bring Celeborn back, you introduce Glorfindel, they arrive, let's say, wherever, and then you bring them back with Círdan, and that's your way to kick off season 2. A badass elf just wrecking shop on a whole castle full of orcs, rescuing Celeborn and a few others. And that's how you do it. That's how you kick off season 2. You give us Celeborn, you give us Glorfindel, you have a badass, like, action scene to open up the show, and that's a great way to announce that you're gonna be back on track, and you're gonna be bringing in the characters that are supposed to be there and focusing more on what Tolkien actually wrote. So that is how I would open up season 2. I think that would be a great way to open it. I have no idea what this show is gonna do, whether we're gonna open up with, expect we'll probably open up with, Nori and the Stranger. Now, which could actually be an interesting sort of little plot for season 2. One of the, Nazgul, one of the ring wraiths, is actually an Easterling. So I'm hoping the reason that the Stranger and Nori are going out into the East is for us to meet this character and for us to get to see him in his own element, in his own realm. And then something goes down between the Stranger and Nori and this guy. And that's what causes him to then travel westward into Middle Earth, where then he'll get sucked up into Sauron's schemes and corrupted and become one of the ring wraiths. So hopefully that's why that plot is going to be happening in season 2. That is going to let us introduce us to that character. Because outside of that, there's no way that. But even then, I don't know how you do that, because then the ring wraiths would know about hobbits, and Sauron and the ring wraiths don't know anything about hobbits in the Third Age, because they only learn about them from Gollum once they capture Gollum. So they probably can't even do that unless. But then again, that would require me believing that they're going to have any interest in any kind of canonical story at all. So they'll probably do it anyway. But I would like to at least see that. I want this Easterling who becomes one of the ring wraiths. I want him introduced in season 2. That would be another really interesting way, because they can explore to their heart's content and really develop a really interesting and fascinating character. And they can do what they want with him, as long as he eventually comes into Middle Earth and becomes one of the ring wraiths, one of the 9. So we'll see. But I'm trying to think if there's anything else I want to go over. And to go back to the cold opening season that I would do with Glorfindel rescuing Celeborn. You have Celeborn there, and Glorfindel will give him some Lembas. You bring Lembas back in. So Celeborn eats the Lembas to like reinvigorate him, and then he rushes out, and a whole big battle is fought as the elves fight their way out of captivity with Glorfindel's help. So that's a perfect moment to reintroduce Lembas to the story, because Galadriel was actually taught the making of Lembas bread in Doriath by Queen Melian, who was one of the Maya. So one of Galadriel's many tutors growing up in her earlier days, she was tutored by gods and angels, basically. So it would be a nice touch to give us Celeborn, and then have Glorfindel give Celeborn some Lembas to give him some energy to help him fight his way out. But I don't know. They really have to stick a lot closer to what Tolkien actually wrote if they want to have a better season 2. Because again, they can do all their own characters. They can bring in lots of people, have subplots galore. But the central events, they need to really just do a better job sticking closer to what Tolkien wrote, because they failed miserably at it in season 1. And I don't even know like what they're going to do with Numenor, how they're going to even like have the Numenor story play out, because Tar Palantir is dead at the end of season 1. So, spoiler alert for those who may not be aware. After Tar Palantir dies, Muriel's supposed to become queen, but Pharazôn basically forcibly marries her against her will in defiance of Numenor's laws. They're cousins, and that's not allowed by Numenorian law. And then he seizes the scepter and declares himself king and calls himself our Pharazôn. Because in the Numenorean royalty, the faithful were Tar and then their name, and the Kingsmen were R and in their name. So they had slightly different, like, royal title, if you will, depending upon their ideology. So I'm guessing that Farazan's going to do that at the start of season 2. He's just going to seize power. And but because at this point in the show, Numenor is so entrenched in the Kingsman ideology, they want nothing whatsoever to do with the elves themselves. They were going to help the Southland humans with Muriel, not the elves particularly. I'm curious to see how they're going to do Numenor's role in the Wars of the Second Age, because the Numenorians come to the rescue of the elves multiple times in these upcoming wars. Like, Sauron would have won had the Numenorians not, on an occasion or two, arrived in time to turn the tide of the battle in a couple of these upcoming fights. So I don't know how they're going to go forward and have that still happen, unless they're going to have Farazan suddenly change his mind and decide he wants to rescue elves, even though here he's the head of the faction that hates them. I don't really know how they're going to do that, to be honest, because they've changed so much of the dynamic of Numenor's story. This is the biggest problem so far with the timeline compression, is Numenor's story arc is should be much earlier than it is in this show, because the rest of the Second Age events in season 1 seem to be about the year 1000, somewhere between 1000 and 1590. But all the Numenorians that exist in the show are the Numenorians who are there 2,000 years later at Numenor's end. So the Numenor that's supposed to exist at this point before Sauron goes to war with Eregion and Lindon and everything, this Numenor that existed then is supposed to still be pretty friendly to the elves. Like, they come and meet with High King Gil-galad and start setting up colonies and things, and start setting up havens that eventually grow into colonies. But in the show, it's like the entire Numenor plotline has jumped for thousands of years past where everyone else is in the show. So I don't know how they're gonna, like, do that going forward. Like, how is Numenor gonna help? Why would Numenor help the elves in particular? They would help the humans per se, but I don't know. I guess it doesn't really matter. The show's gonna do whatever the show's gonna do, and they already proven in season 1 that they don't really have to make up any legitimate reasons for why anybody does anything. But part of what this whole live stream is about is me kind of going over the things they really, if they want a better season, they want a better, well-received season 2, start fixing these things, start making the things happen in story organically. That makes sense. So I'm trying to think of what else to kind of go over. I've been rewatching the Numenorian parts of the episodes, and it's just shockingly bad. It's just shocking how bad those Numenorian scenes are, and just what a waste of time they actually were in the show. I can't understand just how ineptly they handled the Numenorian part of the story in season 1. It was so clunkily done. Everything was just so, like, overly dramatic, and none of it made any sense. And another example of just having characters do things just because is Galadriel, like, acting like an absolute ass in Numenor. And for some bizarre reason in the show, Galadriel doesn't seem to be able to know how to conduct herself in a court setting. And Halbrand, Sauron, is like trying to give her tips on how to act. Now, if he's supposed to be some random Joe Schmo human from the Southlands, he has no, like, experience at any royal court. He's been like a drudge, working some field somewhere his whole life. He has no idea what the protocols of a court would be. I mean, you can just not be an asshole, you can do that. But he would have no, like, way to give her any specific guidance and protocol wise. But Galadriel's entire life has been spent at court. She's, I think she's from the house of, Carnarvon or whatever, Finwë. Finwë was the, first Noldor High King. That's her family. Her father is one of Finwë's sons, so she's grown up in the original Noldor court. In the First Age, she was at Doriath for a while at the court of King Thingol and Queen Melian, and in Middle-earth, she's been at, the court of Lindon, the Gil-galad's court. So if there's one skill set Galadriel has, it's knowing how to conduct herself in a court, in a royal court setting. That's her bread and butter. It should be her bread and butter. And in the show, her personality is written in a way where she just pisses everybody off and acts like an absolute idiot instead of being a well-versed someone in protocol. She would know how to conduct herself. She wouldn't be no reason for her to act the way she does in this show, other than the show is just, this is the way they decided to present her. Because I don't, like, Galadriel and Isildur are mirrors in the way their characters are presented. Just like, they're the worst possible, dumbest versions that they could come up with for these two characters. Because they seem to think, if we make them either an absolutely, utterly insufferable, incompetent asshole and make him an absolutely, utterly useless, worthless dreamer who doesn't want to do anything, it'll make their story arc, their character arc to their great achievements seem so much more better. No. You cannot turn Fredo into Michael Corleone. That does not work. You can't do it. So if you want Michael to go from like war hero Michael to Godfather Michael, he has to have the foundation of war hero Michael. You can't turn Fredo into Michael. And making Galadriel like the elven Fredo and making Isildur the Númenorian Fredo does not work. It's not how you tell a story. That transformation is not believable if they're just absolute idiots at the start. There's a big difference between trying to fight against what you perceive as a laid out path for your life and being a useless, worthless moron. So, okay, so Kyle says, really, the Numenor plot needs the original motivations to function properly, not immigration paranoia, but with lust for the undying lands and the immortality that was thought to come with it. Absolutely spot on, Kyle, because this is another thing that's completely left out of the Númenorian plotline. The driving force behind the Kingsman ideology is their desire for immortality. Their problem with the elves is they're not racist or bigoted, that stupid, they took our jobs, absolute garbage South Park kind of scene in season 1. They lust after the immortality of the elves. They believe that they're worthy enough. They're the superior humans, and they should have that same immortality. They view it as it's wasted on the elves. And their driving force, is why they turn away from the gods, why they turn away from the elves, is that they want that immortality for themselves, and they can't handle not having it. So every decision they make is driven towards the end goal of finding a way to become immortal. And in this show, is any of that present at all? It's just they're just bigots for some bizarre, unknown reason. No real reason is given in the show. They're just bigots. So, and it's just clunky and really just, again, a bad way. And one elf washing up on shore, basically being rescued from sea, is not elves invading your land to do all your work for you. I mean, that's just the stupidest thing I've ever heard in my life. So they just failed absolutely completely at Numenor and its story. Like I said, not having Lord Elendil's father, be front and center between him and Pharazôn being the kind of like two power players outside of the actual throne. It's just a massive critical mistake. And it makes it impossible to tell Numenor's story correctly. I mean, what are we going to get around to, like, do you know anything at all about Pharazôn from season 1? other than he's just kind of tweaking. He's manipulating and things too, but you don't really know anything about what drives the man at all for the most part. And he has just the most inept son. I mean, I'm assuming his son is either going to become a ring wraith as well, or his son. What's the point of his son either? Because his son is just so utterly inept. Like his son is like another Fredo. He's like a worthless idiot. So I don't even understand what the point of him is. But yeah, the whole Numenor dynamic is completely missing. What makes Numenor function, what divides the people, this ideological rift. None of it is there in season 1, and a large part of that is when you start removing critical characters from the story, you end up with these kinds of problems. This is exactly, like I mentioned earlier, what happened to the second half of the Game of Thrones TV series. When they started removing characters and plots from the show, the storyline entirely, they just went off the rails because they took away things that Martin wrote they could use that would be compelling stories. They threw them all away and then changed so much of what they had left over, and they couldn't write the story anywhere near the level of that Martin could. And we got the just descending mess through seasons 5 through 8. And I really hope for season 2, this show starts bringing in those characters that they left out. And that's one of the things I mentioned earlier. That was the second point they need to fix, is they need to have Celeborn there. They need Celebrian there. They need Círdan there. We should have had Amandil there. Anarion, not letting us see the relationship, the sibling relationship between Isildur and Anarion. Just mind-boggling decision to have Anarion. He exists, but he's somewhere. And they don't really ever tell us where he is or what he's doing, as far as I can recall. But at least he still exists in the story. But how do you not show us this sibling relationship from the beginning? Because these are two brothers who go on to found Gondor later, building Osgiliath together, and then Isildur with his Minas Ithil, and Anarion with his Minas Arnor, that later becomes Minas Tirith. How do you not have him there? How do you not do the building blocks to show these brothers and what their relationship is like and what the dynamic is between the two of them? I mean, you wouldn't even know Isildur is the older brother. It kind of sounds like Anarion's the older brother because he's already gone off and doing whatever he's doing. He's already graduated or whatever. But you wouldn't even know that Isildur is not the firstborn. So it's just so bizarre. All right, so Jesse says, wonder how they will use the dwarves in season 2. Durin was one of the best parts of the first season. Besides their sortie during the war and the fall of Gundabad, they don't do much in the Second Age. That's true as well. They don't do a lot in the Second Age. They do come to the elves in critical moments in some battles. But the dwarves are supposed to have a presence in Eregion. Some of the people working with Celebrimbor in the actual story are dwarves. The dwarves come and set up shop. I forget the dwarf's name off the top of my head. I'm assuming they're going to have Prince Durin pick up his role. But the doors of Moria that Gandalf finally figures out how to open in Fellowship, so when they enter the mines, those doors are built by one of these dwarves. And Celebrimbor is the one who enlaids the whole design and inscription with Mithril on it, so that it's sort of magically hidden and magically appears. So where are the dwarves? They should be there. They should be working on these projects together. And so there's all of that they could bring the dwarves in that context of they've come to Eregion because they want Celebrimbor's artistry. They can create the stonework, but they want Celebrimbor's artistry because he's such a renowned artisan in crafting these doors. So I imagine at some point we'll get that in this show. But to not have the dwarves like be there and in that workshop alongside the elves, working together to show the friendship between these people that exists here in this part of Middle Earth, um, is just it's really disappointing because outside of those kind of things and the dwarves coming to aid of the elves in a couple of battles, they really don't have a huge involvement. They're just doing their own thing in Khazad-dûm. And the whole waking the Balrog and the Balrog laying waste to that dwarven kingdom, which causing the dwarves to flee to the Lonely Mountain. That doesn't happen until like well into the Third Age. Like the Balrog emerges in the year 1980 in the Third Age. So that's thousands and thousands of years away. So I don't know, outside of the dwarves' involvement with Celebrimbor and in Eregion, in and around the area, I don't know what else they're gonna do with them. I'm not really sure where it's going. And then again, we have 2 Dorans alive at the same time, which isn't possible, but in the show they are, so we have no idea what kind of plot they're gonna give them. I really hope they don't have the Balrog emerge and destroy Khazad-dûm, because again, that's a Third Age event. And if they had any brains in them at all, and they just stuck to what Tolkien wrote and just really did it, and just got the writers who knew how to write this stuff and flesh it out, they could do this Second Age story, have it be a resounding success, and then they could do another show where they bring us into the third season. I mean, the Third Age. There's a lot that happens in those first couple of thousand years of the Third Age as well. After the Sauron's been defeated and the ring is lost, there's still a whole host of things that go down, leading all the way up to the emergence of the Balrog and the destruction of Khazad-dûm. So there's so much story to tell, but they're really messing up on just what they've started so far. I don't know. Yeah, to not even include some of what the dwarves are actually doing in story makes me wonder what are they going to do with them going forward for the rest of the show. I like the dwarves. The dwarves are one of my favorite parts of season 1. Prince Durin and his wife Disa, they were, like I said, it was presented almost like a little sitcom, and it was actually enjoyable seeing their family dynamic. So, but they have a reason. I imagine if the 7 and the 9 are going to be forged, the elves are going to need more mithril, which means they're going to have to go back to the dwarves. So I'm not sure how that's going to happen, and how they're going to drill or dig for more mithril without the Balrog, because the Balrog's awake. We saw that in season 1. So how are they going to go and get more mithril without disturbing the Balrog to where the Balrog's going to emerge? Because again, that's supposed to happen for thousands of years. So I really don't know what they're going to do when, like I said, so much of what should have been in season 1 they just eliminated from the story for them to give us this just insufferably bad Halbrand Galadriel back and forth for the season. And it's really hard to say. It's just because, again, like you mentioned, they are the best, probably the best part of season 1 was the dwarves, and we got so little. I mean, they weren't even in the season 1 finale. They were done with their story like an episode or so earlier. So, but I don't know. I like them, so hopefully we get to see more of them. But it's just a matter of how are they going to even start these without the 7 and the 9 being forged yet. So, and what reason does Celebrimbor have to even forge the 7 and the 9 at this point? Why? What for? I mean, they weren't forged as weapons to fight Sauron. They're forged to put on and wander around the stupid elven tree of immortality to try to heal it. So is it not going to work? And they say, well, maybe we need more than 3 rings, so let's go make more rings. I mean, it doesn't make any sense. Or is the show just going to have Sauron make the 7 and the 9 along with his 1 ring? Maybe they'll do something like that. So they don't, like I said, they don't seem all that interested in lore, in Tolkien's canon and his lore. So I don't really know where they're going to go with it. But I don't see any legitimate reason for what would even motivate Celebrimbor to forge the 7 and the 9 at this point, since those were supposed to be forged before the 3. So it's really, really difficult to say what role any of these people are going to play in the story going forward, when you can't rely on what Tolkien wrote because they've already discarded so much of it for in season one. So I'm not really sure. I definitely would like to actually see Khazad-dûm. We were promised we would get to see Khazad-dûm in all of its glory, and Elrond walking on a bridge for 2 seconds is not seeing Khazad-dûm in all of its glory. I want to see Khazad-dûm. Like, show us the people, show us the community, show us what it's like. Where's their food? Where's their markets? Where do they eat? Where do they grow their food? How do they grow it? Show us what life is like there. Same with Eregion. Eregion should be a thriving, lively place. Like I mentioned in one of my earlier videos, like Linden is the high court, so it's protocol, high society, all that stuff. But Eregion is where the artists are. Where's the poets and the playwrights and the sculptors, the actors, the painters? They should all be in Eregion. There should be thriving pubs and music and theater and all these things happening there. And we got a beautiful shot of the Eregion as a city, and then the rest of it's just sitting around watching Celebrimbor at afternoon tea. So this is another big, big failure of season one. There's not a single presence of any culture in any of these locations we've got. Nothing at all. Like, none of these places felt alive in any way. None of these places gave you any indication of what life is actually like there. I mean, in Numenor, we did get the Elendil and his son and his daughter, made up for the show, daughter, sitting at a table, like having a drink and chatting. So we get a little tiny slice of that. But that was about it. We have no idea what it's like to live in these places or who these people are. But like I said, Eregion should be a thriving, it should be like, if any of you are from New York City or been to New York City, like Eregion's the village, and Linden would be like Wall Street. That's kind of the different vibes these places should have. So I hope we get some of that, because before you destroy these places, you need to actually show us them so we care about them. So when these places are attacked and some of them destroyed, it matters. It means something emotionally to the audience. But right now, I mean, none of these places really mean much of anything. We have a couple of characters at each place, but the locations and its people are really just kind of background noise. So there's so much they have to, like I said, there's way more than those 3 things that they have to fix. But the 3 things I mentioned really kind of touch on all of these different areas. Like, things have to happen organically in story in a way that they're earned, and they need to stop happening out of order. And because they can't be earned if they're happening in the wrong order, because this event motivates that decision. So when you start doing them backwards, none of it makes any sense. And like the missing characters that are critical to the story, you need to start bringing them in. Stop wasting our time on all these subplots. And again, like I said, unless Theo is going to become a ring wraith, I don't know what the payoff is to this entire Tir Harad storyline with all these people. What's the payoff? Why are they there? Why are they taking up such valuable screen time if it's not going to lead to something on that level? Because this is what we should start getting in season 2. But we should have the 9 rings should exist. They should already be here at this point. So why would anyone even think about who's going to become a ring wraith if there are no rings to wraith them with yet? So now we've got to come up with a reason for why in the hell Celebrimbor was even going to forge 7 and 9 in the first place, since he went right to the 3 rings. But part of what they should be sort of building towards and manipulating the audience with, story-wise, plot-wise, character-wise, is we should be like, okay, having discussions. Who's going to be the ring wraiths? Which are the 9 that are going to be corrupted? We should be starting to get these characters. Season 2 better start bringing in some more of these people who are going to end up becoming part of these Nazgul, part of the 9. My guess right now is Theo and Farazan's made-up son are going to be 2 of them. we know one of them is an Easterling, so I'm hoping season 2, Nori and the Strangers storyline will bring us into that area where we'll be introduced to that person who becomes one of the 9 later. So that's my first 3. But outside of that, I mean, I had no idea who's gonna become one of the 9 at all. Because if you look at the story and look at the characters we have so far, there aren't really any contenders, are there? There's no contenders at all outside of those couple of possibilities. But nobody else really has any chance of fitting that bill yet because they've introduced so few people. And the few people that they have introduced, we already know what their storylines are. We already know what their plots are. So it makes sense for these made-up characters to play these roles, to then become the people who become the ring wraiths, among other things. Because that should be one of the big mysteries of the show, and is trying to figure out who you think is going to become one of these 9. And they're doing, again, they haven't even bothered crafting the 9 yet. So, and we're already going to be into season 2, and the 9 rings don't even exist yet for us to even be figuring out who's going to end up wearing them and corrupted by them. I get it. So I'm just looking back and rewatching parts of season 1. I'm just flabbergasted at the decision-making process of these showrunners. I don't even know what story they were trying to tell in season 1 with the choices that they made. And it's just so bizarre. It really is bizarre. Unless the critics are right and that these people hate Tolkien and their job is to destroy his legacy, which they can't do because we have all of Tolkien's books and his written words, so they can't change any of that. All they can do is just, in their attempt to like try to take his stories away from him, they just make fools of themselves and make really bad TV shows. So, but we'll see. I really hope that Amazon either brings somebody in who knows how to run a story, because these 2 guys are in way over their head. They either bring someone in to kind of guide them, and bring in writers, or, who know how to write fantasy. Because you can be a great scriptwriter, you can be a great storyteller, but that doesn't mean you're going to do a good job in a particular genre. Like, I love writing fantasy and sci-fi, but I couldn't for the life of me even attempt to write like a murder mystery or anything like that. That's so outside the realm of the kind of stories I write and consume and know. I wouldn't even know where to begin to write something like that. So get the people who know what they're doing, pilfer some of the dragon people away if you can, because they seem to hire people who know how to take bullet point summarized fantasy plot and flesh it out into a compelling story. But we'll see. We'll see. Narvi. Yes, Jesse, I think that's the name of the dwarf who builds the doors of Moria. I think it is Narvi. So where is Narvi? I mean, I'm assuming that Prince Doran is going to just end up doing that instead of having Narvi in the show. Because it would be nice to have another dwarf other than King Doran and Prince Doran, and obviously his wife Lisa. But, are we going to get to know any other dwarves? Are we going to have any other dwarves as part of this show? It'd be nice. It'd be nice to have some more dwarves with names who are actually participants in this storyline. Like, where are they? Get them in, bring them in. Where's the dwarves who are supposed to live in Eregion and be working with the elves? So give us these people. Let us see their lives. Let us get to know them. Because, again, no one's going to give a crap when you start killing off characters you've done not a shred of legwork into building up as characters that people will care about. Tragic deaths are tragic only after you actually care about the people in the first place. Otherwise, it's just the nightly news, like that you're disconnected from in many ways. It's not, there's no connection to the audience with any of these people yet because they're so poorly written. Like I said, outside of the few dwarves we've had, they're very well written, very well acted, very well presented. You care about them because they seem the most realistic and the most legitimate. they come across as characters, as people, where most of the rest of the show is very wooden and very simplistically written and very poorly written. Let me Cool. But yes, so Narvi. So where is he? Where's now? Did we just have, like, going back to Numenor a second? Did they just randomly hand Elendil Narsil? Because if you go back to, I think it's episode 3, when they're first there, and Muriel's talking to Elendil, and she's like, "I got a job for you," and the Numenorian soldiers hand Elendil a sword. And Elendil looks up at her, and the scene cuts away. I mean, is that Narsil? Did he just get like? Is Narsil just hanging around? It's not like the sword of House and the of the Lords of Andunai. It's not their sword. It's just chilling in the royal court somewhere. Because it also, when Muriel goes and sees her father up in his tower, I could swear like Narsil is just sitting, leaning up against the wall, because it certainly looks like Narsil from the handle. So is it just like a sword that just is lying around that they just randomly, oh yeah, you can use this sword? Like, no meaning? Are they stripping away even Narsil as to having any prominence or importance? And it's just gonna be some random sword that he happens to be handed? Because that's kind of what it looked like in season 1. I'd have to go back and watch that again, but it really did look like some random guard just gave him a sword. Here, have this. So, it's like, where are these elements? Elendil, I was really disappointed in. The actor seems like a fine actor. He played the part he was given. But does this strike you as what you would expect Elendil to be like? In the show, he's some minor lord. He barely has any presence. In reality, Elendil is one of the great sea captains of Numenor. He's one of its greatest sea captains. He's like held in high prestige and high honor in that society. Because again, his father is like one of the top 2 advisors to the king, to the royal family. So Elendil is not some minor little he's not some minor lord that has like an acre of land and a little cottage. This is a powerful, noble house on that island. So to turn him into this, sort of, he's just there and nobody knows who he is and he has no prominence or no presence. It's just really bizarre choices on the part of the showrunners to make such significant changes to all of these characters. I mean, what character was actually presented that resembles what Tolkien wrote them as, in any way in season 1? Gil-galad, maybe, sort of, but even in the show Gil-galad is kind of an asshole. He's like, he basically sends Galadriel away because she annoys him, which is not really how Gil-galad should act. So he looks the best part, looks the most, I suppose, like the character we would expect to look. But even he might be the closest to the stories. But not really. But again, I don't know. Does he strike you as one of the most badass warriors? Like, does he look like someone who will strike fear into the heart of an entire host of orcs? Because that spear that he's kind of casually walking around with once or twice in the season, that spear is a feared weapon. The orcs are terrified of that spear and him wielding it. Just like, Elendil with Narsil, you have Gil-galad as Aglos or something like that. I think his spear is named. I mean, this man is like a powerhouse. Like, Elendil and Gil-galad stepping onto a battlefield, the 2 of them alone changes the whole dynamic of a battle. Just their presence with those 2 weapons is like a game changer. Like, it would completely change the strategy of the orcs. They would change how they would react just by those 2 stepping onto the battlefield against them. And, well, again, the actor generally looks the part, but I don't see anything yet out of him, or again, it's probably just the way he's written, that would give him that kind of presence and prowess on a battlefield. because these are supposed to be some of the most powerful people alive on that planet. Like, they should have that force of will and that sheer force of presence about them that commands the room when they're in it, and you don't really get that from hardly anybody in the show at all. Like, nobody has that sort of powerful presence that when they step in the room, the whole room notices and defers. Elendil should be like that. Gil-galad should be like that. Elrond, even to a degree, should be like that. Celebrimbor is different. Celebrimbor is an artist, so he's gonna have a very different dynamic with people. For him, he's almost like the celebrity in Middle-earth in a sense at this point. So even that, they should be now, they very clunkily played on that with Halbrand. "I'm looking for Celebrimbor." That's just juvenile dialogue in the season finale. But they should have been playing on Celebrimbor's status and celebrity. That should have been part of his character and the season. We should have seen him out walking, the streets of Eregion, going down to the pub and a crowd gathering around him and him telling tales of his grandfather and all this stuff. Where is any of that at all? Where is, like I said, where is the life? Where is the culture of these people in these communities? So, but so much to fix for a better season 2. But like I said, the 3 things I came up with covered the most is stop, having things happen out of order. They need to happen organically. We need the characters you've eliminated. We need them back, and stick to the lore, stick to the canon a lot closer. And give us a good story. Just give us a good story in season 2. Give us a story that doesn't absolutely suck ass the way season 1 story did. Try to make an effort in making a good story. The characters you've come up with, Bronwyn, Theo, these are actually interesting. You can make an interesting story around them, because they're not bad characters, but just get people who know how to write them, or get the showrunners the hell out of the way of the writers and let the writers tell a story. So whatever that bottleneck is, you got to fix that for season 2 for things to just go a lot better. Anyway, and I think that is it for today. Coming up on about an hour and a half. So this is my first time using StreamYard. Very interesting. I don't know what it looks like, because this is only 720p in StreamYard. So I don't know what it looks like. I'm going to go watch this later to just kind of look at it from just a visual view. But I did like being able to display comments. As I do more live streams, I'm going to try to get to a regular, like, weekly live stream or same day and time every week. I'm working towards that, because I think the live streams are fun, and it's nice to be able to interact with people like in real time when we're talking about things like Tolkien or Song of Ice and Fire and other stories. So, but yeah, this has been fun. And now I've got to look back up the stupid keyboard shortcut to turn off this weird magnifying thing. I want to go away because it's one of the few pop-up windows in Windows that doesn't have a little X. You can just close it out. You have to do a keyboard shortcut. So anyway, that's like irrelevant, I suppose. I am Charles, the SirBookSage. Happy reading.